Welcome to Biology of Marine Mammals. I'm Dr. Leslie Williams, and this lecture covers migrations. The first thing we'll explore is which marine mammal species actually perform migrations, and then we'll look at some of the migrational patterns to try to elucidate the purpose of these migrations. So many marine mammal species make long yearly migrations, though not all of them. Most of the species that do perform these migrations are going to be mysticetes. Some of the more notable mysticetes that perform particularly long migrations include the gray whales and the humpback whales, with migrations that can exceed 5,000 miles a year. Occasionally, pinniped species will also perform yearly migrations, and this could include the elephant seals, particularly the northern elephant seals, as well as some male otariids. So what exactly is a migration? A migration is defined as a long, linear, uninterrupted travel. In other words, a travel pattern that clearly shows we are trying to move from one location all the way to another location far away. And usually a formal migration includes very little feeding or distraction along the way. So again, migrations, mostly the realm of the mysticetes. We're going to actually look at some migrational patterns to try to elucidate what's actually going on in a migration and why are these marine mammals doing them. So we'll go ahead and start by looking at the migrational patterns of the mysticetes. So right here, this is a very nice picture that actually shows the migrational patterns of a right whale, a gray whale, and also a humpback whale. And the first thing that I want you to note is that here we see these blue areas here. These blue areas are considered to be the feeding grounds. In the northern hemisphere, we see them in subpolar waters, and in the southern hemisphere, we also see them in subpolar waters. Number 2, which is orange, is going to be the breeding ground of a right whale. You can see that here and here. And then number 3 is going to be the breeding ground of a humpback whale. You can see that here, here, up here, more tropical waters. And then also the migrational pattern of the gray whale is shown in this dark blue arrow here. So what do we infer from these patterns? Well, first of all, the migrations appear to be between these feeding grounds and these breeding grounds. Also, these feeding grounds appear to be in these subpolar waters. In other words, they're not quite polar, or sometimes they are polar, but they tend to be pretty cool waters. And the breeding grounds, on the other hand, seem to be in warmer waters, temperate, subtropical, or even tropical waters. So the first question we're going to ask is, why are these feeding grounds actually located in subpolar waters? So in order to answer that, let's take a look at this graph. This graph is going to go ahead and highlight the primary productivity, which remember is going to be the level of phytoplankton that show up in these waters between tropical, temperate, and subpolar. This line right here represents the tropical primary productivity. You can see it's low and consistently low all year long. This line represents the temperate levels. So temperate's going to be slightly warmer, like what we might see off the coast of Washington, Oregon, or even Northern California. And so you can see that there's higher levels of primary productivity during some seasons, such as spring, summer, and potentially fall, especially in areas that are considered to be upwelling areas. But what about subpolar? Subpolar is very dramatic. You can see there is a peak in primary productivity in the summer, and that when we look at all 3 areas, the subpolar waters during the summer have the highest primary productivity pretty much anywhere in the world. And this is going to be a key fact when we look at why the feeding grounds are going to be in these subpolar waters. So recall that particularly for the mysticetes, they have to have a high prey density. In other words, if the density of their prey isn't high enough, it actually takes more energy for them to have a feeding event than they actually get out of their food. So in order to ensure that the caloric value of their gulp or lunge or even suction feeding event is going to be of high value, we need to make sure that the density is high. Well, since they feed so low on the trophic level, they feed at a level of 3 usually, they also are very intricately tied into the primary productivity. In other words, the higher the primary productivity, the higher their prey density is going to be. So because subpolar waters during the summer have the highest primary productivity, that's going to be where the highest prey density is also going to be for this Mysticetes. And so that's where you see these Mysticetes foraging. Now, so during the summer months, these Mysticetes are going to be usually in subpolar waters feeding. And interestingly enough, they will eat more than they need on a daily diet. So they'll eat twice or maybe even a little bit more than their daily caloric need. And what they do is they convert the excess energy that they consume into a blubber reserve. Now that blubber reserve is going to help them get through the more paucity months, so months that don't have nearly as good feeding requirements that are coming up during their migrations. So now let's turn to where they migrate to. So if they, in those summer months, are going to the feeding grounds, then they're going to go to the breeding grounds during the winter months. Breeding grounds are usually in warmer areas, and they, of course, are reached by long linear migrations. Again, critical to note is that these breeding grounds are used during the winter months. And also interesting is that little to no foraging occurs during the migration or during the stay at the breeding grounds. And instead, these whales rely on their blubber reserves to support them through that time. So what actually happens in these breeding grounds? Well, very often, the first whales to arrive are pregnant females that are ready to give birth, and they'll go ahead and give birth to their newborn calves. The females will then stay with their calves for the rest of the year. Not in the breeding grounds per se, they might stay there for a couple months, but then what they'll do is they'll begin their migration north with their newborn calves, and the newborn calves will be nursing for some or all of that time. Also, you will get reproductive females, so females that are going to be in estrus or available for reproduction, and reproductive males that are coming down as well. And then you also get some other individuals that come along, like maybe some juveniles will make the trips even though they're not reproductive. It's not really sure why some of these other individuals will make the trip as well, but many of them do, particularly for the gray whales. However, that doesn't mean all individuals make the migration every single year. It's been hypothesized, for example, that humpback whales that are female and are not reproductive may not make the full migrations. Perhaps it's too energetically expensive for what they actually get. So why are these breeding grounds in warmer waters? In other words, what's the advantage to moving to a warmer body of water, and of course enduring that extremely long migration in order to actually breed? And there's two major advantages. First and foremost, if you're a pregnant female and you give birth to a newborn calf, that newborn calf is going to have a much better survivability in a warmer water body. That's because a newborn calf lacks the blubber layer that the adult may have, and therefore is not nearly as well insulated. This means that the newborn calf is going to not suffer hypothermia as easily, and in many cases have a little bit better success in survivorship, so that they can begin to build up their blubber layer on the way back to the feeding grounds. For the actual adult whales, they also have a lowered metabolic rate. In other words, again, if you're in warm water, you don't have to expend as much energy generating heat, and therefore these whales are going to do a little bit better for themselves in terms of daily energy expenditure than we'd see if these whales had stayed in the colder waters. Now remember, they're not really feeding very much during this time. So is it worth it for even the whales that maybe aren't reproducing to come down all the way to these warmer waters simply to gain some benefit at the end by having a lower metabolic rate? Seems to be the case, because many whales that are not reproducing, certainly are not pregnant females, are making these migrations. So again, whales have an advantage to doing something like this because of their large size and because of their swimming energetics. They're huge. They can cover a lot of distance in one day without a huge energy expenditure. So this means that these whales, these Mysticetes, the great baleen whales, are going to say it's worth it to actually get down to a warmer body of water, sit for a while, not move around too much, and have a lower metabolic rate for 3 months or so before heading back north. So that's all worth it in terms of the energy expenditure. So when we summarize, we can say that the purpose of these migrations then really is going to be the solution to two potentially conflicting needs, one of which is the nutritional needs and the other is the reproductive success. So again, the nutritional needs are going to be the need to be able to feed in an energetically desirable way, a way that basically says, okay, I need to make sure that I get enough food in every gulp or lunge or suction feeding event. So those are the nutritional needs. That's going to be met as long as your prey density is very high. So that's why they stay in colder waters during the summer. The reproductive success is actually conflicting. Having a newborn calf in very cold waters is not good for the calf, and of course reduces survivorship of the calves. Also, being able to meet in one particular area during a given time of the year ensures that males and females come together and for a chance to mate. So this ensures the reproductive success for adults as well, even if they're not gestating females. And that concludes our discussion of migrations, and I'll see you next time.